The next group of measures that we're going to talk about are the counting measures. These are really helpful. We're going to talk about 4 different count functions here: count, count A, distinct count, and count rows. They all work in a very similar way. They just count slightly different things. So starting with count, count is designed to find cells in a column that contain numbers specifically. So all you do is write the count function, point it to a column containing values, and you're good to go. Count A, very similar, but this counts the number of non-empty cells in a column. That could include numerical or text-based values. Syntax-wise, same deal, single argument for the column name. Now, distinct count, this is one of my favorites because historically it's been something that's unusually difficult to do in Excel. There hasn't been the same equivalent function on the Excel side to do something like this. And this is where DAX really stands out. You can easily count the number of distinct or unique values in a column using that distinct count function. Again, one argument for the column name. And then last but not least, we have count rows. This one's slightly different because this actually points to a whole table or a table defined by an expression like filter or all, and counts the number of total rows in that table. So pretty clear, pretty straightforward. Let's practice a couple of these in our AdventureWorks file. Okay, so go ahead and open up your AdventureWorks report, head to the report view, and what we're going to do here is add 2 new measures practicing these count functions. And the first measure that I'd like to add is related to returns. Now, note that we've already created a measure for quantity returned, which is the sum of the return quantity field. But in this case, I want to return the value of total returns. So very similar concept, but the difference is that if a customer came in and returned 2 items, that would count twice in the quantity returned column, but I only want that to count once as a return. And since this AW returns table includes a record or row for every single return, what I can simply do here is count the number of rows to give me that total returns value. So to do that, we're going to use a count function, right click, new measure. Let's call it total returns. And we're going to set that equal to count rows and just point to that table, returns. So we're counting the rows in the AW returns table. As simple as that. Press enter. It's added my measure here. I can select the matrix, drag total returns into the values, and you'll note that they're very similar to the quantity returned, but a little bit lower. What that tells me is that the vast majority of returns, in this case, were from single items, but there were a handful of multiple items returned, which is why the total number is slightly lower than the quantity of returns itself. Now, let's go back to that concept I mentioned earlier about each row or record in that return table representing a return. I want to actually look at the table for a minute. So we're in our return table here, and you'll note that in every single case, we've got a return date, we've got a territory key assigned to it, product key assigned to it, and a return quantity assigned. So there should be no blanks anywhere in this table. And again, each row represents a return. So what that means, if I go back and revisit that measure, that means that I could theoretically calculate this same total returns measure in a few other ways. For instance, instead of count rows, I could calculate a simple count of any column in that returns table that includes values. So let's start typing returns. We could technically use any one of these, any of our keys. We could use the count of the quantities or the return dates. They should all return the same thing, again, because there are no blank values in that returns table. So let's calculate the count of return quantity. Tab it in, close the parenthesis, and press enter. And you'll see that these total return values refreshed and remained exactly the same, which is what we'd expect to see. And then same story holds if we use count A as well, because again, very similar function, except count A also accounts for non-numerical values like text. And that shouldn't make any difference in our case, but let's just confirm by pressing enter. There you go, they've refreshed again, same values. So there you go, 3 different count options or counting approaches to evaluate the same total returns measure. Now up to you which version you'd like to use. In this case, I'll just keep it as count A for now. And the next measure I'd like to add is a very similar one, but looking at the sales table, I'd like to add a comparable measure here for total orders. And same story kind of holds here. We already have a quantity sold measure, which sums up the order quantities, but I'm not interested in the total quantity. I'm interested in the total volume of orders as a whole. Now, to figure out how we're going to calculate this, it's helpful to go and take a look at that sales table for ourselves. And looking at the sales table, one thing that's interesting is that we've got this order line item column, which means that if I placed a single order but purchased 2 different products, that will show up as one order number with order line item 1 followed by order line item 2, which means that there are duplicate values in here because there are multiple line items for any order containing multiple products. And the reason we're digging into this is because I can't use a function like count or count A against any column in this sales table, like order number, because it won't respect the duplicates, and I'll be double counting and inflating my order totals. So this is a great opportunity to use that distinct count function because I want the count of unique order numbers, and that's going to give me my measure for total orders. So let's go back to our reporting canvas, right-click the sales table, add that measure, and you guessed it, we're going to name it total orders, and that's going to equal the distinct count of my order number column in my sales table. So AW sales, order number, tab it in, close the parenthesis, and press enter. And now just to demonstrate, let's grab that total orders. I'm going to put it in right next to quantity sold. And there you go, kind of the same type of comparison we just made with quantity returned and total returns. We have quantity sold and total orders. So as you can see, a number of sales, a number of orders contained multiple line items or multiple products or multiple quantities of the same product. So this is a great use case for when something like distinct count can really come in handy. And it's really as simple as that. Those are your basic counting functions in DAX.